It is my great honor to welcome to the show DJ, artist, and writer Paul Miller. Paul, welcome to the Pop Apocalypse. How are you today?
I am good. It's a beautiful autumn day, and I just went for a long 40-minute walk
Mm.
around my neighborhood. And well, when I say neighborhood, it's like dirt roads in the middle of a forest. So,
Oh, do you have like has the fall foliage started yet, or not
yeah,
quite?
100%. And
Oh,
it's earlier because of obvious climate issues and the shifting of the various patterns of the season. It's a great metaphor for the world we live in. Like, everything's like kind of off kilter and
mm,
off season, all puns intended. Yeah.
yeah. Well, nonetheless, I've been up in the Northeast for like 5 years, and I haven't gotten out for the fall foliage sort of drives. So,
Highly
uh,
recommend it.
yeah. All right, so we start every show the same way. Um, and it's because HDS, Harvard Divinity School, is right across the street. We're in the shadow. It's good to start with the sort of religious foundation here. So, what was your relationship like to religion when you were a kid? Were you raised in a church? Were you raised sort of atheist, somewhere in between? What was that like for you?
Okay. Let's give you a little bit of background. I grew up in Washington, D.C., and I grew up near DuPont Circle, which is where all the embassies are. And my mom had a family store, a business called Toast and Strawberries. It's a legendary store for people from the 60s and 70s. So it was kind of a cultural epicenter for like poets, artists, creatives. My father was also dean of Howard University's law school. So I'd like to say that I was raised in a sort of a humanist household where inquiry and conversation and being able to really ask pointed questions about things was celebrated and encouraged. We did not grow up in a religious household whatsoever. Sundays I would go for long bike rides
Sounds better.
to Harper's Ferry sometimes, which is it's a significant bike ride. Beyond that, I did go to a Quaker school for a while, and I enjoyed that because of the small classes and the ability to have that silent circle. There's this thing in Quaker where everyone sits in a circle and if you have some statement to make, you make that. But beyond that, everyone just sits there. And that's a beautiful thing. Quakers, I think, are one of the only religions that haven't been involved with American wars. They may be the Amish, they're, kind of conscientious objectors to war. So
Mhm.
that kind of left me with an impression of, wow, you can have a civilized and reasonable religion where people are just cool. Like I love Quaker schools. I think they're awesome. So, um, to make a long story short, not religious,
Mhm.
but interested in human values from the view of seeing humanity as a kind of expressive species. Like we really love to get into the creative aspect. And to me, religion is a kind of creativity. So,
Mhm.
um, yeah, at the end of the day, nope, no religion. I believe in people.
Yeah, very fair. And that's one of the very cool things about religion tout court is it's sort of an ultimate human expression, right? It gathers underneath that banner sort of arts, philosophy, practice, dance, ritual. So even non-religious persons are very interested in the humanities. It sort
Mhm.
of guides you back there too. It's just an interesting thing to think with. So your parents were very academic, or
Mhm.
you have come from an academic background. So you end up heading to college. It's Bowdoin, right?
Mhm.
Very nice, very nice. And it's there that you started DJing.
Yeah.
Very cool. So I was looking at Dr. Seuss's Eclectic Jungle. That's one
This
of,
is a long time ago.
yeah, but that's a
Okay.
great title. But you're studying literature and philosophy at the time. So did you, as you were getting your start DJing and doing the sort of college DJ thing, were you using that sort of like philosophical and literature approach to sort of building the show or thinking through what it means to be a DJ through those lenses yet? Or was it more just like a thing to do while you were in college?
Yeah, I mean, college was a place of inquiry. But Bowdoin kind of has that. It's aligned with the vibe of the Quaker thing, like smaller classes, more intense conversation between professors and students, highly engaged. I mean, it's a great school. I highly recommend anybody out there listening. If you want to have a cool, dynamic, and rigorous education with small classes, Bowdoin's for you. Um, From my perspective, when I was a kid, I was always involved with, I planned on being a diplomat. So growing up in DC near where all the embassies are, I loved seeing the cosmopolitanness of it all and seeing a lot of different cultures and approaches to life. But I also was into punk, and DC had a big punk scene. And moving to Bowdoin for college, I majored in philosophy, French literature, and macroeconomics. So all three of those, Bowdoin has this thing where you can have multiple degrees within a concentration.
Hmm.
So it's not a normal. Bowdoin is progressive at every level. It's this really brilliant school. So for me, macroeconomics and the idea of organizing human activity and looking at how humans kind of create economies out of our activity is just a powerful tool for thinking about our time, or any human time. So DJing was meant to be a side hobby, a fun thing. I collect and listen to records and always have, but music was not meant to be my core thing. I was planning on graduating. I did graduate with what you call high honors, uh, and I wanted to get into. I was going to go to graduate school, but I ended up in Paris after university, as one does sometimes. And DJing, I started DJing more over there, and then eventually moved back to New York and started throwing events and parties with a whole bunch of artists and creatives. Um, from my perspective, the philosophy and degree in macroeconomics allowed me to really think about how sound and organized culture work. It's fascinating because if you really think about economics, it's not really just about, I paid $5 for a cup of coffee. It's much more about the chain of events leading to that transaction. And eerily enough, economics is one of those uncanny systems where there's a term, the invisible hand.
Hmm.
Humans love to transact. Um, there's Adam Smith's notion of the invisible hand as how we organize everyday exchanges, whether they be in linguistic or neuroscience or the basic premise of how you organize a city or a nation or global finance. So music was kind of always a fun space for me, a happy place, but I didn't take it seriously. I didn't think I'd be, here I am 55 and still DJing. I just have concerts constantly and I
Hmm.
tour. I, if you had told Paul 1.0 back at college, hey, by the way, you are 21 now when you graduate, and when you're 55, you're still going to be DJing. That Paul would have said, whoa, there is no way in hell I'll be DJing at age 55. But here we are, and the global economy has absorbed DJing and become DJing is a massive global phenomenon. I'm on the more avant-garde art side of that, so I hope that answers your question.
It does very much.
Definitely, I
Yeah,
had no
no.
plan on DJing whatsoever.
Yeah, that's wild. But I mean, I've talked to a couple guests about this. There was something really interesting happening in the early 90s. Like
Hmm.
it's like this sort of explosive cultural time that I don't think we've totally put our hands around quite yet. And you were, in the epicenter of that by being in New York City at that time. Um, so I want to get into the sort of DJ life and particularly the sort of reflexivity that goes into becoming a DJ. So, uh, to sort of push that forward, how do you go about, or how did you go about creating your, for lack of a better term, character? Right. So you go with the name DJ Spooky, aka the Subliminal Kid.
Yep.
So how do you fashion that? How do you land on something like that? What is it, as you're sort of building that out, what is it intended to represent and evoke?
Sure. Okay. So this is where you go back to majoring in philosophy as
Mhm.
a cross discipline with macroeconomics and French literature, is that the idea of the uncanny, which Sigmund Freud would call the unheimlich, kind of, I felt that here's a situation where electronic music, and again, the early 90s, electronic music was new, and there was a kind of sensibility that you'd never seen before because there was a democratization of how people experience culture. Usually we had television, radio, other things, but with the rise of the Walkman, the rise of the cassette, boombox, there's a decentering of experience that really allowed people to create their own sound systems, their own approach to listening. Then you had the iPod, then you had, and it seems to be a layered and nuanced approach to the more portable computational power, um, allowed you to have all of your music in one place. Your vinyl collection then migrated to a software collection. In the 90s, that was all kind of setting the groundwork for this idea of ubiquitous computing.
Mhm.
So from my perspective, again, in the 90s, DJing was kind of an information aesthetic. Like you kind of were a record collector, and in order to be a record collector, you had to go to record stores. You'd go to all sorts of spots all over the different cities. You're always combing around and looking for interesting graphics. There was kind of just a fun sense of being a convener of situations. And that's what it's not just music for me. It's my motto these days is music is information. But here we are in 2025, where the notion of songs. There's a very famous series of poems, songs of myself that people like Walt Whitman would have generated in the 19th century. But DJing, it's like songs of other people. Like you're kind of constantly riffing on the material that's in the world around you. So you're an information distiller. Like you're kind of taking all these fragments and making it work. Um, there's a beauty to that. But in the 90s, again, to go to the heart of your question, it was a transitional moment. We're moving out of analog to digital culture at every level. And there was a huge economy of transition. Like for a long time, everybody thought vinyl was going to go out of,
Mhm.
because become completely obsolete. So it was cheap. And that also was a class dimension there that allowed you to have an inexpensive way to get into culture. You go to a record store and there used to be like 50 cents or a dollar for, for vinyl. Now, yeah, it's get 50 to $100
Mhm.
it's become a cool vintage collector thing. Um, so there were times where I'd go to some weird record store in Maine in the middle of some bombed out town or something, and they would just say, clearance, take all the records there, and there'd be like boxes of them for $20 or something. Now, if you did
Mhm.
something like that, you go on Facebook Marketplace, which is again that digital invisible hand algorithmic propaganda machine we call Facebook. Um, One could argue that Marketplace is actually keeping Facebook alive
Mhm.
because so many people use Marketplace now. But
Mhm.
um, again, I think that transition was the most powerful, interesting transition in human history because the reason I'm so gung ho about the 90s is that there was an openness and a sense of playfulness and irreverence because it was all new.
Mhm.
And that was what made it kind of a window into possibility that nobody had thought about before.
Excellent. So, um, that really sort of captures the early '90s ethos in a way I hadn't heard before. Um, but one of the things I'm wondering, and you brought up Freud and you brought up the uncanny or unheimlich, right?
Mhm.
So, when you look back, so you adopt the moniker DJ Spooky, and then your first album is named after the Thomas Ligotti collection,
Yeah,
right? Songs of a Dead Dreamer. So, what was it about this? Was that a way of trying to evoke or gesture towards that uncanniness? Or is there something about like horror that was in the background there at the time that was sort of infusing what you were talking about or what you were doing?
sure. I mean, the uncanny and the notion, again, of Freud's concept of the unheimlich animates most of 21st century life. Everyone is surrounded by the uncanny. Algorithms drive almost all information networks, and the notion of, again, the invisible coercive nature of those kinds of algorithms are what we could argue have broken democracy.
Mhm.
And we're at a crisis point of democracy because algorithms are essentially weaponizing information itself. Um, and eerily enough, the way we look at cultural authenticity and an algorithmic sensibility, there's this collage right now.
Mhm.
And again, the problem of our time is media literacy. And I always felt that DJing was a kind of new media literacy, like you're kind of looking at sound and collage as points of navigation in an information overload. I mean, I'm a
Mhm.
huge McLuhan fan, and I felt that McLuhan really got it at a very early stage about, the medium is the mass age. So DJs were kind of the storyteller of the mass age. Um, and so to go back to your question, how we look at new isn't a matter of the technology at the time. because the ancient Greece, one could have argued, cities like Acropolis, I'm sorry, Athens, with the rise of democracy, they also had a huge renaissance when people were able to flourish and have freedom of expression and so on. And that was called the Athenian Golden Age. But for us, the 90s was kind of an early golden age because there was an incredible since that all information could be accessed. Many people were what you're creating, what you call the Creative Commons, this idea of sharing and exploring information. Most websites were kind of new and raw, and people just started freely sending music back and forth. Now, there was controversy, and don't get me
Mhm.
wrong. I mean, so for example, Napster
Mhm.
I don't know, I'm grandpa here, so do you remember Napster?
I
It
do
was,
remember
okay.
Napster for sure. Uh,
55-year-old global DJ. Okay.
uh,
So Napster at that time kind of kicked in at a certain pivotal point in the decade. And everybody was doing stuff like burning CDs and
mhm,
passing mixes around. Cassettes slowly started to give way to CDs. And by the time I graduated from college and then moved back to New York from Paris, most people, you could burn CDs easily and just kind of download something from a Napster or whatever, and then make a mix or put it on a CD and give the mix out. And if you walk down Canal Street in Chinatown, you'd see guys selling bootlegs of Chinese guys from West Africa, little stalls selling every possible movie or stuff onto bootleg CDs. Nowadays, you can not just find a couple songs on a CD. Obviously, that's old news. You could find everything that person's ever made like, as a
mhm,
bootleg in Chinatown. Um, and that's okay. I'm intrigued by that. But the amount of what you call compression of having
mhm,
access to all this information and readily being able to not just access it, but edit it, change it, transform it. That's just YouTube now. YouTube is now
mhm,
the biggest record store on planet Earth. And the combination of how we look at the arts and accessibility, usually there was a kind of a filter process. You'd have, very wealthy, top-down type culture, but DJing turned that upside down, where
mhm,
people had access to everything and were able to distill the best of it and then make
mhm.
it more refined, like a new kind of medium.
Yeah.
I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, yeah. So that we're starting to sort of segue into the more sort of like philosophical media theory side
Mhm.
of this discussion. Although harkening back, because I am old enough to remember the Napster and the guys who just used to walk around with a bunch of burnt DVDs.
Mhm.
And it's like, oh, that was a fun time. Like it's so innocent,
Yeah.
relatively speaking, and had snuck in recorders to watch films in the theater, and yeah,
Yep.
much different thing now. So how did you see your role as DJ as the archive started to become such a more sort of like substantial part of how everyone interacts with the culture?
Mhm.
When we have YouTube, when we have Napster, when we have everything that's available, and now we have LLMs where everything is out there. So what like what is the role? Like,
Right.
what
That's
do
a
you
really
see the
good.
role of the DJ within this new space?
Okay, I love the transition you just made between the archive and the large language model or the
Mm,
large media model. And there's a deep structural correlation there. On one hand, if you look at AI and its relationship to LLMs, that's basically language as a computational system and distilling any response of ChatGPT or, any of the major platforms that are AI, they're basically just computational narrative engines, and they're kind of taking they've learned over the course of a short amount of time just insane amounts of data and archival structuring.
mm,
And at the end of the day, it's all math.
mhm,
But the problem with DJing was that it was more art than science. So
mhm,
you would be able to figure out. You have to. It's an intuitive situation. You walk into a room, there may be music going, there might be a party going, but you have to figure out what music works for that party. Which it's a skill. You'd be surprised.
mhm,
At every level, when crowds gather and people begin to exchange conversation and social process, there's a score. There's a way of looking at the music. When I say the score, the music score, not a math score,
mhm,
but there's an intuitive mathematics to reading the room. And the beauty of that is that you got to make the party rock. And that's also, don't forget, I'm more the avant-garde and
mhm,
noise and experimental hip hop. I'm not mainstream by any stretch of the imagination, purposely so.
Mm,
Um, so archive became front and center how people think about navigating a data-rich environment, and the AI just took it from there.
mm,
Um, One could argue there's an art critic that terms as the dematerialization of culture,
mm,
where the materials of culture would have been stuff like a violin, a cello, a book, things where people have access to a physical sensibility. Now everything is etherealized. There's software at every level. There's algorithms at every level. And I mean, for all intents and purposes, I really think we're going to be seeing a huge sea change in how people think of the work environment. It's now there's at least my theory is we've moved further past the attention economy to sort of this sort of notion of cognitive outsourcing. Like
mm,
everything is being kind of outsourced to these algorithms and AI, DJing too. I mean, and I'm sure any person who thinks about creativity, buckle up, the AI is coming for it. So
mm,
these are issues that actually I'm writing a book about. It's
mm.
called Digital Fiction: The Future of Storytelling. And you have two of my books on your shelf, by the way. Thank you. I appreciate that.
We'll
Um,
we'll have the next two once those are out. So,
yeah.
uh,
The other book is going to be about AI and food. I'm
mm,
fascinated with molecular gastronomy, how molecules from different food sources interact with your gut biome. Your gut biome then influences your brain biome. And the reason I say brain biome is that we've never really mapped out how food changes the brain. And I think that there's a tremendous amount of innovation that can be happening right now. Everything from like omega-3 fatty acids to vitamins and supplements and green powders. If you go through Whole Foods, any of those areas are kind of there's I'm a huge Whole Foods fan, mainly because they just have usually have an incredible, range.
mm,
So I'm using of like mushrooms, for example. There's a psychedelic component to them, but there's
mm,
also a food component. I mean, you can have an incredible sautéed mushrooms on a steak or sautéed mushrooms on a chicken or fish or whatever. But they are incredible innovators of managing the landscape around them.
mm,
Fungi, insects, all of these things are unexpected food ingredients. So that's what that other book's about. And
mm.
yeah, I'm behind on both, to be completely honest. I should,
I've never
time
met
and space.
somebody who was ahead on a book. All of us, every one of us is behind. It's just how
Yeah.
far. So the art of okay, so AI and storytelling. That's the first
hmm
one.
Yeah, it's called
Okay.
digital fiction.
Yeah. I'm very, very curious. So let's see. So in you were just reflecting on, sort of AI coming for the creative process. So what basically how do you see it? What are humans going to need to do to basically distinguish themselves from the AI and from this sort of like mathematics of generating art and music and everything like that? What's the sort of human space, right, that we're sort of disarticulating ourselves from that?
I like this term disarticulation. Huh. Okay. This is where we get into our current moment of, post-truth,
Mm,
and the right wing kind of hijacking of mass narrative, mainly because of algorithms and social media and various platforms owned by various billionaires that are there. They are making billions of dollars off of the attention economy by polarizing people and
mm,
mathematically getting them to see and engage with algorithmic processes that they're far away not helping with. They don't even realize they're being coerced and manipulated, and the rage, anger, terror, they keep you engaged, and so the
mhm,
engagement economy. Okay, so what to go back to your question, eerily enough, the way we look at the arts and the way we think about perspective in the 21st century is now thoroughly digital. We're in a data-driven society. There's a crisis of democracy going on globally because we're looking at these kinds of issues that network systems basically are not geared towards how we normally have organized society. Um, so, from my perspective as an artist, that's interesting. Every
mm,
crisis is an opportunity for innovation. Um, the books and writings, and then going back to the DJing, they were all mostly about art. And I have to admit, art is one of those still free places where there's just nothing's been currently locked down. I mean, I'd say literature, other forms of the sciences. There's going to be a tremendous amount of the way AI will immediately just tear through all of that.
Mhm.
But DJing is still one of those places, and music itself, and visual arts and the conceptual arts. There's a lot of ebb and flow going on, and I don't know if we're in a window where that window will close within the next 2 to 4 years. I would guess so. But right now, it's just fascinating to see the explosion of creativity
Mhm.
because of the way people are being, on one hand, liberated from the previous historical forms, but on the other hand, there's no immune system for it. Like people
Yeah.
are just being completely infected with this algorithmic sensibility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I've been thinking a lot about the sort of AI universe we're coming into when going back through your books, simply because you're a lot of what how I read your work in Sound Unbound, Rhythm Science is kind of like media theory, right?
Hmm.
It's a way of thinking through this new digital age. And when you write extensively about the remix, right? And the way in which you can sort of put a new voice on something from the past, and you can sort of combine the past, and it ends up becoming a sort of place for bricolage. A lot of what these algorithms are trying to do is like they're doing a sort of mathematical remix of these things
Yeah.
and taking like large scales of different music and literature, and they just sort of reformulate it into something,
Hmm.
right? So it's just going to be a very, very strange time, uh, distinguishing, if we need to distinguish, right, between these sort of mathematically generated algorithmic products and then the sort of human products that are more close on the front end of it. Um, yeah, interesting. We can talk about
Well,
the go ahead.
yeah. Well, to go back, I love the way that we're having this dialectic. I mean,
Yeah,
that's what a good conversation is.
yeah.
So, if you think about remixing and transforming found materials, we all are being remixed right now by algorithms.
Mhm.
The human cognitive process of correlation, of inquiry, of discovery. Most people's sense of discovery is going for a Google search.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
um, and eerily enough, the way it's, you know what, I got to stop using the word eerie.
But we
Uncanny.
are in eerie times.
Yeah, we are
Absolutely.
100% eerie. Very
Yeah.
science fictional.
Uh,
So that's some the Gotti, naming my first album, Songs of a Dead Dreamer. I always chuckled about the fact that the dream, there's this infamous Chinese kind of philosophical sense where a philosopher wakes up one day realizing he's the dream of a butterfly, dreaming he's a philosopher, or is he a philosopher dreaming he's a butterfly, dreaming he's a philosopher? And that's one of those famous sort of mythic places in literature where the dream itself is that sense of movement from the real to quote unquote the subtle sense of unreal.
mhm.
And I'm a big fan of Borges, for example,
Mhm.
and as much of his writing as much as I am of like Hegel and other kinds of critiques of dialectical process. There's the Garden of Forking Paths, which is one of my favorite Borges's stories, where this person's reading and engaging with. And there's also this one where an emperor commissions a map, and the person makes the map as large as the territory, and then the territory itself disappears into the map. We're there, like
Yeah.
we've disappeared into our algorithms. And the fun part about that is it's time to play. I think we're
Mhm.
ready to kind of anyone who has reasonable literacy with how algorithms work, you can be having a field day with this stuff. If you don't, then you will be just some angry troll on Twitter, arguing with a bot, and not knowing
Mhm.
that you're arguing with a bot. Um, I mean, I'm part of the first. So for
Yeah.
me, this is much more a nuanced time, and just recently, the assassination of Charlie Kirk, who,
Mhm.
again, I disagree with everything, literally 100% of what he did or said. I don't think that anyone should be had put into a place of political violence. But the uncanny sense is that it's been weaponized by algorithms. And there
Mhm.
was a really interesting article recently where there was a whole on Twitter, Instagram, most major platforms. There was a discovery of Chinese and Russian bots that were sending out more and more inflammatory stuff, and they traced these back to Russia and China.
Mhm.
There's a couple of articles that I could easily forward to you about that. Mostly
Mhm.
Wired. Wired's been doing a great coverage of algorithmic, what you call computational propaganda. Um, and people were enraged, and that was the point. Like, so there was stuff saying both negative and positive about Charlie Kirk, but each one of the posts was meant to enrage and keep you on the platform to,
Yeah.
being your little keyboard fury. And that was the point.
Mhm.
Anyway, a fascinating article, and heartbreaking because people don't even realize they're being manipulated by just. There was one kind of sample where some guy was ranting about Charlie Kirk and didn't realize he was arguing with a bot, and the bot was just posting stuff to say more and more crazier stuff to the guy because he was, and it was probably some old dude sitting in
Yeah.
front of a beat up old laptop who doesn't even know what's going on. But that's the point.
Yeah, and then they just get caught in these loops, and just get angrier and angrier and angrier. So that's the dark side, right? Like that's the sort of dark possibility. But I'm hearing you, and you're saying you're on this first side, and you're sort of using the algorithms for the benefit of your work. So how do you use them? Right. So
Mhm.
I know you're writing about them, but like, how does it go into either your writing or your music making, your art?
The aftermath of over 30 years of digital culture is that there's kind of like this notion that the real and the unreal have blurred.
Mm,
So for DJing and many of the things that my books and writings and my art and my music have covered, and that's why you name yourself Spooky,
mm,
is that you can press play and there's nobody there. There's a sense that the uncanny is what animates our time. And that's where we were talking earlier about,
mhm,
again, computational propaganda, algorithmic coercion. And I always am a fan of that, just learn a little more. Like, I'm a huge
mm,
fan of continuing education. And if you don't know about something, ask questions, learn, don't be passive. And again, many of the people who are benefiting from the dismantling of the American educational model and dismantling of American progress, they thrive on ignorance. Ignorance is very expensive. And the more we move forward, where they're dismantling so much of what made America an incredible nation state, these people, they're committed to national decline through ignorance, through suppression of discourse, dialectic process. you know, and it's stuff that I think the best solution is sunlight, like having
mm,
a good debate and robust conversations across political, ethical, cultural, and above all, racial politics
mm,
is what makes America such a cool, interesting place. I mean, I love knowing people from different worlds. It's incredible. But we're in a time where it's like the Weimar Republic, Germany, where it's very
mm,
fragile. There's a lot of political turmoil, and purposely so. Who benefits from the chaos?
mm,
And those are things that, as an artist, I'm interested in. And the history of when right wing and other regimes get into powers, the first thing they do is go after public inquiry, go after
mhm,
media, go after universities. And I'm a huge fan of Timothy Snyder and his books on
mm,
fascism and so on. He kind of hosted the beginning of my residency at Yale a little while ago.
mm.
Uh, anyway, we're having a conversation, so let me know if I'm too
Oh
much
no, no,
ad.
no, 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 no. I enjoy the sort of watching the thoughts move, but what hearing you sort of reflect on the American situation in this sort of like dark trajectory, but this land of possibility brings up how within the last, I guess it's decade or so,
Hmm.
you've been asked to score films,
Hmm.
and not just like films, like some of the most important classic silent films that have been made. I would love to talk about how you approach the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, but I'm going to
Hmm.
put that to the side for a second because what we're talking about now is you also scored Birth of a Nation.
Yeah.
Right. So I mean, it sort of invents American cinema, right,
Right.
on one hand, but it's also one of the most problematic racist films that's been made. So like how did you approach that?
Hmm.
Right? Like in because a lot of what a remix would be or a rescore would be sort of giving honor to the original, but also ensuring that it speaks to the sort of present moment, right? And there are certain echoes. So, like, how did you end up putting that all together?
Sure. Well, Birth of a Nation is probably one of the most toxic films of the century, and or the last century, sorry. But at the same time, there's a legacy of it's the first film to show voter suppression. It's the
Mm,
first film to really engage with how whites had appropriated Black culture from the viewpoint of blackface and the minstrel show. The obviously turning of history upside down and making the hero become. I mean, we're obviously living in the echo of that with this current, world of renaming bases for Confederate people instead of like, there's the list goes on and on and on. Every day you wake up and you're like, oh, that's Birth of a Nation. Oh, that's Birth
Mhm.
of a Nation. Um, and I don't want to live in Birth of a Nation personally.
Mhm.
But as an artist, sometimes one needs to confront the legacy of history's relationship to how we look at the world around us. And heartbreakingly enough, Birth of a Nation, and I mean, nobody in their right mind would want to live in Leni Riefenstahl's Triumph of the Will, for example, either.
Mhm.
There's a couple of films from nation state directors, Sergei Eisenstein's Battleship Potemkin, Leni Riefenstahl's Triumph of the Will, and D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation. There are three films that were the foundation of how we think about mass spectacle.
Mhm.
Battleship Potemkin was used and weaponized for revolutionary purposes because it showed workers rising against their treatment on the Battleship Potemkin. Birth of a Nation was used as an allegory for suppression of whites, and where they were made to feel victims, even though they weren't victims. So I think that we need more critical thinking than
Mhm.
ever, and music for me was a kind of an incitement of that. Right now, we have a kind of a misalignment of incentives because people are incentivized to get into rage, anger, and so on by all these algorithms. And music generally is a place of celebration, a place of engagement, the body, dance, you name
Mhm.
it. I generally have been a person who's been more abstract with my music, but I celebrate dance. And one of the projects I'm doing that I'm using of comes out of a critique of the Birth of a Nation was I always was fascinated with the choreography of Birth of a Nation.
Mhm.
Um, the with silent film, the film is told by the bodies of the characters. Like the good guy goes up, or the bad guy is like, there's they have to tell the story with their body because there's no words. So there's a sense of choreographic uh, engagement with how they present themselves. So the hero of the story will have a certain sense of portrayal. The villain, so the in the movie, the black people were made to be the villains and all this weird stuff where there's just again over and over you can see how much that film set the tone for media's landscape right now. Whether it's
Mhm.
George Floyd being murdered by the police or the Black Lives Matter protest of the last several years, they've been all used. I mean, I don't want to live in a Fox News fever dream. So these are things where I think the film was a cautious. My remix was a cautionary tale. Do you
Mhm.
want to live in this? Here's a mirror. Like let's
Yeah.
take a look. And it was a very powerful experience.
Yeah. Were you who were you commissioned by to do that one?
That was with Lincoln Center and a couple French opera
Mm.
houses in Paris. It's been man, it's 2025, man. There's been a lot of projects.
Yeah, I'm going back through your bio. It's just like I don't know how. Are you one of the people who doesn't need to sleep? Right? You can just like always do multiple projects at once and sort of follow them through to completion. It's really impressive. Did you do Caligari before Birth of Nation or after?
After. And in
After.
fact, I'm rescoring Sergei Eisenstein now.
Mm,
I'm a huge fan of Eisenstein
yeah.
and Dziga Vertov and the whole Soviet kind of sense of like coercion in cinema for revolutionary purposes. The beauty of our time is that we're in a media overload. I mean, there's a
Mm,
massive saturation of media, but these early black and white films still are just visceral, powerful,
mm,
iconic. Um, and yeah, it's something from my perspective that we all can look at the DNA of our time going back to silent film. Um, but Birth of a Nation was commissioned. I toured it. I never had it. I was always expecting some more controversy, and as a matter of fact, we'd have very civilized debates. In fact, the
mm.
grandson of one of the families that was the Camerons, they're in the film. Um, they owned a plantation that actually Duke University was helped start from. And Duke University was part of a plantation. We had the film at Duke University, and the guy was like, "Hey,
Oh.
do you want to see the plantation that was based on the film in the film?" It's about 40 minutes drive. You jump in the car and I'll show you the old plantation. So we drive from Duke University to this plantation. And I was like, yep, that's in the movie. And
Wow.
yeah, but guess what? Duke University, his family donated the land
Mm,
for Duke University. A lot of American universities come out of slavery,
mm.
and Harvard too. Don't
Yep.
forget.
Very
You
true.
know. So these are things that any reasonable person you would just want to just scream at the sky, saying how can be human beings be so crazy? But that's again having a background in economics. You can see
Mhm,
that mainly about how humans and the organization of human labor and the imagination just animates every transition, whether it's from the industrial to the information
mhm,
age or the agricultural to the industrial age. People organize themselves, figure out new modalities, and the rest is kind of like a cascading series of effects.
mm,
Anyway, Birth of a Nation,
mm.
perfect metaphor for that. The
Yeah.
current film, I'm doing is I Sergei Eisenstein, and
Que Viva
he
Mexico, right?
yeah, that one is hilarious because he never finished. It's an unfinished film about
Mm.
Mexico, which America's relationship to Mexico, as we, it's an unfinished.
Well,
I couldn't make this stuff up, but it is powerful. It's a really
yeah.
brilliant film.
That one I haven't seen, so I'm looking forward to getting it. Is that going to be coming out shortly, or because I saw
I've
your
finished.
artist statement up there? So
I haven't finished it yet.
yeah.
So, it'll probably, realistically, I'll turn in the score probably by end of or middle October.
Mm,
And then it'll take a couple of months. It'll be out probably towards the end of the year, early next year.
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is a sort of abstract talk in certain ways, and we've circled around the academy, right? And you've had a
hmm
number of residencies and academic appointments. You spoke to the one at Yale. There's ones at Stanford. So you've had feet, in the academic space and in the artistic space. So I'd just love to hear you reflect. What do you see as the most sort of productive relationship that there could be between academia and, for lack of a better term, just speak generically, hip hop, right? Or turntablism or something like that, right? What is it? How can those sort of be fruitfully combined together?
Okay. Well, the term academy comes from Aristotle, by the way. It's
Mm,
always one of my favorite terms of, if you look at like Athenian democracy, when Pericles kind of set up this notion of democracy and cultural transformation, Aristotle inherited a sense that there needed to be a more formal place for the model of education that evolved out of Athenian democracy. So if you look at Socrates, Plato, and then their legacy with Aristotle, the way that we currently think of academe,
mm,
it's a Greek term, comes out of their process. Right now, with the onslaught of digital culture at every level, I'll give you a funny example of what I think is America's paradox.
mm,
Like when AI first started really taking off over the last couple of years, for kids in classrooms, a lot of professors wanted to ban kids from using AI. And I was like, that's dumb. They should encourage the kids to learn more about AI because the more that the kids have a better sense of how to engage it, the better they'll be able to manage this incredible information transition.
mm,
So America keeps doing this weird one step forward, four steps back kind of approach to academy. Um, I'm a big fan of engaging with more conceptual approaches to education. So I'm a big
mm,
fan of like the Black Mountain College
mm,
that a whole bunch of artists and creatives set up, or stuff like various European academics that set up the Bauhaus School, or for that matter, the New School in New York that was founded by a bunch of philosophers fleeing
mm,
the World War II situations in Europe. So I'm more of a freewheeling kind of person, and I think I'd like to make education far more about play.
mm,
And instead of just rote and memorizing and kind of regurgitating on a test, you should be able to play. And kids love playing, and young people love play. If you can make things like imagine it's physics equation and like put it into something that is play for that kid, they'll learn far more about physics from the play than they would have just sitting there memorizing and trying to figure some equation. Like if you said, if I don't know, I'm just giving a hypothetical.
Mm,
Like if a kid was presented with a fun video game where whatever popular video game, I mean, there's zillions of popular games, but
mhm,
like if your character is running at certain speed and needs to jump over the wall,
mhm,
figure that out. And then, or something that makes it fun. You'd be surprised. But yeah, education, the academy, I guess I'm coming from the viewpoint at the end of the day that we're seeing all of our normal structures under immense pressure.
mhm,
And I don't know if it's just like who the meteorite's already struck, to use all those metaphors of like
mhm,
extinction. It's just a matter of the linear versus nonlinear qualities of that extinction, like which is going to go first. And again, given our current structure of dismantling education through the current situation politically,
mhm.
we'll wake up in 2028 with the next election and hopefully have more of an engagement with how AI can be used for good rather than
Mhm.
manipulation, coercion, and so on. You know, democracy is fragile, and education is what makes it all work better. So I because I was raised in a household where both parents were involved with education,
Mhm.
I've always viewed that as the strongest sense of how to make a society better is more education and more accessible education for everyone.
Uh, do you have another residency, another academic appointment coming up?
Yeah, I'm finishing a project about Butoh dance, and we're
Mm,
in residence at Duke University
mm.
and at Mount Holyoke. Um, I was going to do something at Harvard this autumn, but we ended up having to push that back because of just time and space.
Mm.
I'm also I'm a Fulbright specialist, which is their new update for the Fulbright scholar situation. So I just got that last week, 2 weeks ago, for
Oh,
Vienna. So I'm
yeah,
going to finish my
congratulations.
books. Oh, thank you. I'm
Yeah,
going to finish the two books that I mentioned
yeah, yeah.
as a Fulbright situation in Vienna. But I'm not. I negotiate with them that I don't have to be there for three years. For me is a long time.
Yeah, I mean, you just
So
moved into a new place. It would be hard
yeah,
to,
exactly.
yeah. Tell me about the Budo project. What's
Sure.
this? Yeah.
Okay. Well, Matthew, the fun part about this year is 2025 is the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II, which I'm happy that it's over. But there's still really twisted stuff from the legacy of World War II. One of which is that the major nations after the war set up everything from NATO to the Bretton Woods Agreement for making the world economy based on the dollar, on over to this idea of a permanent Cold War between the United States and the Soviets and now the Russians. So one could argue the legacy of World War II is that it left an incredible restructuring of the global order, which is now
Mm,
being dismantled. I mean, personally, at least that's my take on it, under the current political crisis of democracy. So Butoh comes out of World War II in Japan, where as the losing side of the war, the Germans and Japanese needed to reset their cultures. The Germans recovered financially and industrially. One could argue Mercedes, BMW, all the major companies coming out of their industrial landscape. Same with Japan, Mitsubishi, Sony, all these post-war companies. Um, Butoh was kind of like a meditation on the ruins. Like you've just seen a nuclear bomb go off. Your entire city has been vaporized, and you're standing in the ruins there dancing. That's kind of what, to me, if I was to describe Butoh, it translates as the dance of darkness.
mm,
And I'm working with a choreographer named Michael Sakamoto, and we're inspired by the works of Ryuichi Sakamoto, who's a legendary composer from Japan who I worked with. We just had a workshop at University of Texas in Austin.
mm,
Um, and it was powerful. I mean, the Butoh, essentially, it's kind of a dance of grief and resilience simultaneously. And when you see Butoh, it's slow, it's very majestic. And so we're doing a hip hop Butoh project based on
mm,
that. And it also relates to Shinto Buddhism from a
mm,
Japanese perspective. One of the most powerful symbols in Japan is this circular symbol that's called the Inso. Um, and that's a powerful image because it means the circularity of life, which Nietzsche, for example, called the,
mm,
the eternal return.
mm.
And Buddhism has a nonlinear perspective about individual subjective life. Um, I'm not religious again,
Yeah.
but considering you're a religious channel, so I thought I'd bring up the Buddhist aspect. Um, Buddhism inhabits Japan in a very specific way where they have a deep relationship to the landscape, and it's called Shinto animism. And so, like the rocks have spirits, the a river or stream will have a spirit, and Shinto Buddhism is a part of their poetic sensibility of everything from tea
Mhm.
to a sense of slowness. Where green tea, for example, is one of my favorite drinks. I'm drinking
Mm.
pretty robust ceremony grade green tea right now. But for them, it was a process of a deceleration. Like when you
Mm.
have a tea ceremony in Japan, there's a slowness to it. They'll do tea gardens and other stuff. And I think if the world drank more tea, it'd be a better place. I'm kind of
Are you saying as an alternative to coffee? Because I might have to stop the conversation right now. Life without
um,
coffee is not life lived.
yeah, I know green tea is one of those things where I'm a coffee person too.
Mm.
But there's something about the energy and green tea versus energy of coffee. Coffee
Yeah.
tends to make you have this like caffeine tension, whereas green tea is a more mellow, but you still get your energy bump and you still get your
Mm.
antioxidants and other stuff. I I'd say I'm an 8 a.m. coffee person and a 1 p.m. tea person. That's kind of so.
That's a healthy structure. I like that. Yeah.
But Butoh, to go back,
Yeah.
they get it. Like there's a sense that Japan's relationship to the body as okay, let's unpack a couple things, Matthew. One,
Yeah.
science fiction. Japan is science fiction, pure and simple, because of the war. And
Mm.
after the war, they needed to rebuild their metropolises. Tokyo, Nagasaki, Hiroshima, various major cities had been firebombed. So if you look at their cultural landscape after the war, they pivoted to this idea of futurism based on let's rebuild the landscape as these kind of incredible, majestic towers. Every major city in Japan has insane skyscrapers, and at the same time they said let's put the body there and see
Hmm.
what happens. So you have stuff like Godzilla, you have stuff like Ultraman, you have Japanese manga.
Hmm.
Some of my favorite films post-war are Japanese, from Akira Kurosawa on
Hmm.
over to Mamoru Oshii with his film Ghost in the Shell. It's a classic.
Oh yeah.
So what I wanted to do with the Butoh project with Michael Sakamoto is riff on this notion of the future isn't what it used to be.
Mm.
And imagine this lyrical sensibility of electronic music being posited as a core relationship to the how the body moves with pattern.
Mm.
Um, every beat you hear is a pattern. It's like 1, 2, 3, 4. Most electronic music's in 4/4 tempo, but the Butoh sensibility and slowness allows it to have like a polymodality of tempos, fast, slow, slow, fast, asymmetric, what you name it. I'm a huge fan of choreography
Mm.
as an art form. And if you look at Beyonce or the list goes Rihanna, Missy Elliott, when you see a hip hop pop video where it's all women doing their like incredible dance, or if you look at Korean hyper smooth choreography, it's powerful. But Butoh is like a negation of that. It's
Mm.
really it's not as kind of synchronized, and it's more um, kind of like a pattern of brokenness that is fragments coming back together.
Mm.
It's hard to describe because it looks bleak when you see a Buto person. It's like they're wearing this white makeup that makes them look like a corpse,
Mm.
and they move very slowly, and they have this noise and screeching and other weird stuff, but done in a very abstract way.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh,
Beautiful
interesting.
project. I'm really happy with it.
Yeah, I didn't the corpse paint part that sort of takes me aside. Do you have a is there video from your most current performance?
Yeah, I can send you some links.
Yeah.
It just happened 2 or 3 days. My whole team, we're literally, I just got back off an airplane. I think I was telling you, we had the
Yeah.
concert. They're editing a trailer from it, and we have the raw footage from the concert. The official concert opening of it is going to be at Duke University next in spring. So we have
Oh,
to get
okay.
all the elements. This was a production residency.
Yeah.
So the idea was let's try it out. Let's try different approaches, music, composition, and so on, and then see what works.
Cool. I mean, if we can put links to it, I mean, I would like to see it for myself,
Yeah.
selfishly, but like also audience, I think, because this just sounds like a really dazzling, sort of spare art form that would
Hmm.
be very worth watching. So I have to ask the question here. So sci-fi has come up a number of times here.
Hmm.
So. you just mentioned Ghost in the Shell, fabulous. Then Subliminal Kid that comes out of Nova Express, right?
Hmm.
So we can just talk about Burroughs. But so how do you see sci-fi as sort of formative to not just your work, like your DJ work, because there's also a lot of sort of space imagery, right, and
Hmm.
sort of sci-fi ideas
Yeah.
that you see within your songs, but also your perspective on things. Because
Hmm.
I can hear it as a like sort of episteme, right? Like this sort of way of approaching the world that has a certain sci-fi element. So have you sort of reflected on how sci-fi really sort of uh, forms the way you look at things?
Yeah, 100%. Okay, here's my take on science fiction. Some of the oldest science fiction in the world comes from, again, I keep going back to the Greeks. A lot of my friends are like, yo, Paul, why don't you bring more African and other stuff? I love my Africa, but the Greeks and the Romans, amusing of, they didn't have the concept of zero. This is where I
Mm,
think the history of numbers and the history of society is fascinating. Like the rise of the number zero. That's where
mhm.
science fiction begins. And
Oh,
here's my
whoa,
take.
okay.
Yeah, all right. The funny thing about nothingness is that it's hard to imagine. And much of European history, they didn't have the concept of zero in the math up until Fibonacci. So Fibonacci and the whole Fibonacci sequence actually radically transformed Europe's relationship to the history of zero. In fact, the Pope tried to ban zero. Considering we're on a religious show, the Pope
Mm,
tried to ban a lot of stuff. Have you burned at the stake for saying the Earth circles the sun? Fun stuff like that.
mm,
So science fiction was this place of infinite pluralities and potentialities. And I always chuckle about this because the funny thing about science fiction is that um, the Greeks, because of the way that they had this kind of notion of mythic time,
mhm,
again, my Greek is not so great. It's called kairos. There's a sense of
mhm.
repetition. Do you know this term?
I do, yes.
Okay. So they
Kairos.
have deep,
Yeah.
yeah, did I pronounce it okay?
You did. You nailed it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, amusingly enough, deep time and the possibility of infinity goes back to zero. And so,
Mm,
without zero, you can't think of infinity, you can't think of nothingness. But the
mhm,
culture that did get it was the Indians. So, South Asia had a notion of infinity, multiplicity, multiple universes. And one of my favorite metaphors for that is Einstein, when he was working on the general theory of relativity, he won the Nobel Prize,
mhm,
which I think was well deserved. And backstage, he met this one of India's most renowned poets, or a Bengali poet, named Rabindranath Tagore.
mm,
And the conversation between them, you had a Sanskrit-based poet and one of the world's leading mathematicians. And Einstein, when he would get nervous, he would play violin. And the tuning systems of European systems go back to Greece,
mm,
Pythagoras, minor chord, major chord, stuff like that. So the Indian poet is listening to him. And he's like, you guys, Europeans, you have the wrong tuning. You have to come and hear some of our Indians, music. And because you didn't have the concept of zero and your
mm,
tuning systems are all off. So I chuckle about that. So they became good friends based on that. So a light bulb went off for Einstein, and he ended up writing. They had a correspondence called "On the Nature of Reality."
mm,
So you have one of the world's leading poets who uses Sanskrit mythology and early kind of Indian notions of the multiverse, multiple universes, mixed with this general theory of relativity. So they wrote letters back and forth about the poetry of nothingness.
mhm,
Um, anyway, that's for me science fiction. And
mm,
the beauty of that, when I say the poetry of nothingness, most people be like, what do you mean? It's nothing. And I was like,
mm,
well, science fiction posits that anything can be. So if
mhm,
anything can be, then where are we? So one day one of the earliest science fiction stories is Lucian of Samosata. I'm never sure I'm pronouncing it. Again, my pronunciation, I have to deal with a lot of names.
mhm,
I believe it's second or third century AD. And a lot of historians will trace the first science fiction story to this guy, Lucian of Samosata. They're not sure if he was Greek or a Greek Roman kind of teacher, but basically it was called A True Story.
mhm,
And if you're in the second century AD and you have somebody saying something's true, you need to, and it's all like the characters go to the moon, and back then that was really wild to imagine you're going to the moon and they
mhm,
encounter creatures on the moon, and each creature is talking to them about their philosophy.
Mm,
and like what their, sense of being a god or a monster or whatever. And so this went viral for the time.
mm,
And it's Lucian of Samosata, a true story. If anyone listening is out into science fiction, look it up. It's pretty fascinating.
mm,
So these characters are on an epic journey, which the Greeks love their epic Odyssey and so on, Odysseus. This is wilder and weirder. And so
mm,
the characters end up on the moon. They're having philosophical conversations. Various creatures pop up out of the moons, and like start talking about, the future and stuff. And most people would have thought this is totally bizarre. And but some reason it became highly influential in
mm.
the idea of like theoretical or kind of conceptual narrative. So I've always been inspired by that. And there's got to be lots of layers of how people think about the multi. I'm a huge, and I see you have Spaces to Place on your bookshelf, by the way. So
Yes,
I'm a
yes,
huge
yes.
fan of the multiverse.
Mhm.
I firmly believe we're in a multiverse. Like
Mm.
every second of every moment is kind of splitting of into multiple realities. So
Yeah,
this has just happened to be one guided by a good conversation.
good. I appreciate that. Thank you. So and you are a Sun Ra guy, right?
Mhm.
Oh,
Yeah, 100%.
yeah. Have you ever like worked with the orchestra? Like obviously it would be post Sun Ra, but have you worked with them?
Yeah, I did a couple shows with them years ago. There's If you go on the internet, there's me with their orchestra. Let me see if I find out. And there's a movie coming out about him that I'm in as well that I helped narrate.
Oh, no way. I didn't know this
Yeah,
one.
yeah. Um, yep. There was it was in France. There was bits and pieces in 2004. My God, time is flying.
Wow.
And I also hosted a whole bunch of his film screenings,
Yeah.
and we had the Sun Ra Orchestra on Central Park. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff.
Wow.
Uh, if you just
That's
Google my name plus Sun Ra Orchestra, so those were, yeah,
Oh, no, there's so
fun
much
shows.
to go here. So, what is it that gripped you about Sun Ra? Because Sun Ra is one amazing character. And I mean, obviously, the music, he's prodigious. He put
Yeah,
out so much material, but he's also like, I mean, he's like a sci-fi Gnostic in certain
yeah.
ways. So, what spoke to you? Like, what
Well,
gripped you?
Space is the Place is the DNA of our time. I mean, I
Mm,
think that if you look at Ryan Coogler's stuff, I don't know if you saw
mm.
the movie Sinners,
Yes, yes, yes.
or of course Black Panther,
Mm,
or other kind of independent film from from the 70s. There's all sorts of ways that he set the tone for this idea of future narrative
mm,
and multiverse. His writings, his poetry, his music, at every level, is just relentless sense of being able to engage with a strong notion that we're in this kind of altered. He called himself, "I am the alterverse." So that poetic sense of engaging, I would love to see a conversation between him and Einstein. Like so,
mm,
um, if there's two or three people that inspire my work all the time at every level, it's Einstein, Sun Ra, and a dash of kind of some composers like Thelonious Monk,
mm,
Charlie Parker, and then more current people. Saul Williams is a big inspiration
mhm,
always. He's an old friend. There's all sorts of people who are progressive, relentlessly so, like Bjork,
mm.
and the list goes on. There's philosopher Timothy Morton. Actually, Timothy
Yeah.
Morton might be a good person for your show if you
Oh,
guys
yeah.
are.
I went to Rice where he
No.
teaches. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, he hosted the Butoh Dance Project. We
Oh,
brought
you're
him over.
kidding.
Yeah, he
Oh,
came up
nice.
from Rice, and
Yeah.
we were hanging out for the last couple of days talking about the Anthropocene era and
Yeah.
the legacy of the nuclear bombs and the beginning of the Anthropocene. So
Yeah. I mean,
um,
he is the
that's so cool.
guy. Yeah. His
Yeah,
environmental philosophy books are off the charts. He's amazing.
yeah.
He also has published stuff, like
Oh, it's
correspondence with
also,
Bjork.
yeah.
Yeah. So they're quite close. So, yeah, no, Timothy Morton's great.
His new book is called Hell,
I have
and
not read Hell. No. Yeah.
I have not read Hell,
Yeah.
um,
But I'm
but
ready to take the descent anytime. Like that. Yeah.
he's a great guy. He's a very old friend of mine.
Mm,
We're actually going to do a book about Butoh and it's the dance of darkness.
mm.
he's gonna. We just committed to get him to do the introductory essay about the body after a nuclear bomb. And the bomb, the atomic imagination.
Mm,
Amusingly enough, of course, that leads you straight to someone like George Clinton from Parliament
yeah.
Funkadelic. You know the song Atomic Dog?
Of
It's a
course.
classic.
Yeah.
So there's African American kind of undercurrent to many of the issues I'm riffing on, but Sun
Yeah.
Ra, George Clinton, to some extent, Sly and the Family Stone, they're kind of funk aesthetic and at the edge of science fiction. That's kind of what I always look at these guys. And for again, I read a lot. I'm into this notion of a theoretical frame of reference, but I also love working with scientists, and I consider Sun Ra a scientist of potentiality. Like he was always playing with pushing the narrative envelope. Brilliant, brilliant man. Taken from us far too early.
Yeah. So bringing up Timothy Morton and so much of reading you and our talk is about this sort of like media sphere, right? This
Mhm.
sort of like technological space that humans don't have it. Humans are it, like in a post-human way, like we are technologies. But then nature is also part of what you do, right? So, thinking of Timothy Morton's work, but you also had the project on Antarctica,
Mhm.
right? So, I'm trying to come up with a way to question this. But really, like, as a sort of media theorist, what is it that sort of brings you to sort of focus in on something like Antarctica or food or something like that?
From my perspective, it's kind of one of those things of like Antarctica is the place at the edge of the world. It's a sort of poetic sensibility of not having a locked down sense of what's going on. So people don't realize that Antarctica is melting rapidly.
Hmm.
There's a tremendous amount of disruption caused by our consumer habits a world away. Like one of the most remote places on Earth. So I went there for several weeks and was doing kind of what I call acoustic portraits of ice. And that's an art project. There's a book called The Book of Ice, which I have to get around to reissuing. I have a very full plate. There's a lot of projects that need to be rebooted,
Hmm.
recalibrated, and re-released. On the other end of the spectrum, Antarctica is this just kind of the canary in the coal mine for the global imagination.
Hmm.
It really is in total free fall devastation. And it's heartbreaking because we're in a time where the crisis is not just about the climate crisis, but the way the mind crisis of the climate. Like, and that's where something like Eric Davis would chat about it as a kind of a noetics of our time, like how people really rethink this notion of the human subject as centered and grounded in nature. And again, that's a Timothy Morton approach. That's Bill McKibben. There's all sorts
Hmm.
of folks who've really explored that in their literature and writing. Um, so I carried a backpack and went to several of the main ice fields and just wrote impressions as a composer around it, and then came back and did a series of museum and gallery shows around it. Um, I'm always interested in using sound as a distillation point for how we can look at any issue. And if you look at composers like Debussy with
Hmm.
his La Mer, or for example Eric Satie with his Gymnopédies, which are incredible compositions.
Hmm.
If you fast forward to minimalism with people like Steve Reich or Philip
Hmm.
Glass, there is a concentration of tone, and each of these composers responding to the ebb and flow of their time. I'll give you a funny example. There wouldn't be Wagner without the revolutions of 1848. And Wagner, as problematic as he is, by the way, eventually leads us straight to he was Hitler's favorite composer, and they played his work at Dachau, where they had said, Aber macht frei, which means work will set you free, above the gate. Um, and eerily enough, composers, I think, are these kinds of antenna of the time. Like they kind
Hmm.
of distill and figure out patterns in the culture and create music for that. Um, from my perspective, Antarctica was one of the more powerful pieces, but it's kind of now a vanishing place, which
Hmm.
has a relationship to postmodern aesthetics, and above all, this notion of the Anthropocene as a
Hmm.
place of the human subject doesn't even realize it's kind of creating this devastation. And that's again, Timothy Morton really hits it on the nail with a lot of his writing about that. But yeah, that Antarctica project. Currently, I'm doing a batch of other projects that they're all going to be next year,
Hmm.
coming out about various phenomena. Like I'm really fascinated with algae, and so algae help map ocean currents on a lot of levels. And that project actually is that there's I did compositions for that are at the Venice Biennale right now.
Hmm. My
Yeah.
goodness. So typically, says we should come in for a landing. I've taken up much of your time,
Mhm.
but typically at the end of a conversation, I ask, "Well, what is it that what irons do you have in the fire right now? Like, what can we expect next?" But you have so many irons in the fire, with things that to be rebooted. Talked about your books, this algae project, but the one that we haven't touched on yet that I saw up on your website. You're a big part of this Lead Belly
Oh yeah, yeah.
documentary.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. So where is that in production? What's that going to be? Is that on its way out?
Oh no,
Uh,
it's going to be months.
months is not
Uh,
long for a film, for sure.
that's true. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So what
Okay,
is it?
let me walk you through that. So Leadbelly is one of these guys that really, as an American singer, reflected just so much of his era. He helped coin the term woke, which I really use as a front and center process. So the term woke comes out of a couple of his songs, but he also had his other most famous song is called Black Betty,
Mm,
which was a work song that he kind of ripped and distilled into this kind of anthemic inspiration for a lot of the DNA of rock. So his name was Huddy William Ledbetter, and he was born in the late 19th century. I'm an executive producer of the film about him. We're in production and just getting the ducks in a row, so to speak. I can't really give you a precise
mm,
release date because realistically, I would say late next year.
yeah.
But the arc of American history would be very different if his music hadn't influenced people like Bob Dylan, Led
Mm.
Zeppelin, the Rolling Stones, the Beatles, Beyonce, Janis Joplin, Odette.
Nirvana.
Yeah, Nirvana. Yeah,
Uh,
he was their favorite musician, and above all, people like Harry Belafonte and
mm,
Public Enemy. So he really altered the course of 20th century music and paved the way for this notion of rock and storytelling to be kind of in the same pantheon.
mm,
The film is going to, I'm going to guess it'll take about another 4 months to 5 months of pre-production. And then the actual shooting and editing, getting everything ready will take another 5 to 6 months. So there's not much I can tell you beyond the
yeah.
conceptual frame right now because, we're lining everything up. But the premise for me of the film is that the blues was the sort of the architecture of the American century, of the 20th century,
Mhm,
and it was the subconscious of the American project. And when I say the subconscious, meaning it moved from the work songs of slaves to gospel to recalibrating how people felt about their relationship to song and work. And then he became a traveling archivist because he helped set up with the American Folkways anthology,
mm,
um, and that was a very important piece for the Smithsonian. And then on top of that, it just became this archival sensibility of he was able to distill so many different blues approaches. I think he's one of the more important figures of the time.
mm.
Do you know Alan Lomax's
Oh, of
Folkways?
course. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
He, he's the animating force behind that, basically.
Yeah.
Um, I do feel that he is not as well known as he should be,
Hmm.
but amongst cognoscenti and people who are really into digging in the crates and going to the old school stuff, he's legendary. So um, I like I'd like him as a kind of inspiration before people like there's documentaries been about Little Richard, Sly and the Family Stone, of course James Brown and so on, but he kind of he inhabits a similar space to all of them.
Hmm. Oh, can't wait. This is really exciting. And I would imagine you're going to have, you listed the people who are influenced by him, like the roster of people you could have sort of reflecting on Leadbelly in a
Mhm.
documentary like that, in addition to this frame that you just outlined that's great. Yeah, that's going to be excellent. I'm
Yeah.
excited. Yeah.
It's a powerful story that really sort of parallels the arc of American history.
Hmm.
So I'd say when he passed in 1949, America was a very different place than when he was born in 1888.
Hmm.
But there's an infamous Nirvana video of where Nirvana plays "Where Did You Sleep Last Night" on MTV Unplugged, and it just has I remember like 90 million plus views, and just you can see all these other people covering it and being inspired. So, and that's
Yeah.
just one. Beyonce's naming her hole. I believe she's naming her hole next to her after him. Uh,
My
yeah,
goodness.
Black Betty. But I don't know if she's going to use the specific term Black Betty, but she's doing a whole bunch of Lead Belly oriented stuff. She's pivoted to country music for a lot of her stuff right now.
Mm. No, no. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh in the Unplugged, Kurt Cobain likes to tell the story about how he asked David Geffen to buy him Lead Belly's guitar for
Yep.
$500,000. Yeah,
And they
anyway, but
said
that
no.
yeah, like, poor investment. They could have done much better. That's a good use of money. Well, Paul Miller, thank you so much for your time, for your thought. It's just been a joy to have you on.
Yeah, Matthew, thanks for having me. And we are living in very turbulent times. I think
Mhm.
conversations like this across cultures and getting people to realize that there's far more common ground than these algorithms polarizing and causing huge amounts of cognitive dissonance. And I firmly believe a good conversation can change the world. So thank you.
Mm.
I appreciate you having me on.